I'll let you know when we actually start. Okay, we have started streaming. Just going to refresh and check to see if we are up on the screen. And we are. So while Ashok actually joins in, let's actually kickstart this session. Thank you so much for joining in. Just a moment, and then we go. So, good evening, morning, and afternoon to everybody who's actually joining in. Thank you so much for joining us today for the GMAT Insider Insights live Q&A from the makers of the exam. I'm Seema Parikar from Graduate Management Admission Council, and I'll be your host for this session. We are super thrilled to have you here, whether you're just starting your GMAT journey or looking to refine your prep strategy. Well, you're in the right place. So, today we are actually joined by an incredible panel of experts from GMAC who are going to provide you with valuable insights into the GMAT exam, preparation strategies, and test taking experience. So, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. Firstly, I would like to introduce Ashok Sarathy. Ashok is the Vice President of Product Management at GMAC and has been pivotal in shaping GMAT's evolution to meet the needs of today's business school candidates. Welcome, Ashok.
Thank you, Seema. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Anjali McKenzie. Anjali is the Director of Product Management at GMAC, and she too has been driving the strategy and growth of the assessment products at GMAC for over 9 years. Welcome, Anjali.
Thank you so much, Seema. Great to be here. Thank you for hosting.
So excited to actually have you here. And lastly, we have Zachary Fernebok. Zach is a Senior Product Marketing Manager at GMAC with over 10 years of experience in driving successful go-to-market strategies. And he's also uniquely positioned to provide insights, having taken GMAT both at home as well as at the test center, giving him first-hand experience of the exam structure and the real feel of actually taking the test. Welcome, Zach.
Thank you, Seema. Hi, everybody. I am indeed addicted to taking the GMAT.
That's awesome. And to our audience who have actually joined us here today, our goal is to answer some of the most common GMAT questions and help you feel more confident and prepared as you plan your exam. And this session is live, so feel free to drop your questions into the chat. I'll be monitoring them, and we will try to cover as many as possible right towards the end of the session. We have some questions, as I said, we would be curating and answering for you guys. But let that chat keep buzzing, all right? And once again, for those of you who are still continuing to join in, you are live with Ashok Sarathy, Anjali McKenzie, and Zachary Fernebok from Graduate Management Admission Council. And I'm Seema Parikar from the South Asia region, Middle East and Africa field marketing, your host for today's session. So let's dive right in. Let's start with the basics, but the most critical information. Anjali, GMAT underwent a significant change in 2023, and since February 2024, only new version is actually available. So for those of who are actually starting the GMAT journey, what does the exam really look like? And how are the 3 sections available weighted towards the final score?
Sure. So yeah, when we created the refreshed version of the GMAT exam in 2023, we worked really closely with business schools to ensure that we were creating an exam that was valuable and relevant to schools. So that's why, for those of you who are familiar with the previous version of the exam, there's changes to sections, changes to content. We removed certain question types that were no longer relevant to business school curricula. So we are really happy, really excited about the changes we made and the changes we went through in 2023, because now we have an exam that's actually even shorter than the previous version of the exam, requires less prep. Like I said, you have to prep for less question types. So that makes it really exciting. And on top of that, it's really relevant to current business school curriculum. So, there's a lot of great benefits to the GMAT exam that we now have in market. In terms of the actual structure of the exam, et cetera, The exam is 2 hours and 15 minutes long with one optional 10-minute break. So now candidates have the choice of where they want to take their break before or after the first section or after the second section. And it consists of 3 sections, to be clear. So 3 sections, 45 minutes each. The quantitative reasoning section, which has 21 questions, and that includes problem-solving questions. The verbal reasoning section, which has 23 questions, and that includes reading comprehension as well as critical reasoning questions. And then the data insights section, which is 20 questions, and that includes data sufficiency, multi-source reasoning, table analysis, graphics interpretation, and 2-part analysis. So there's various question types in the data insights section, but all of these question types are ones that we, ran through with schools, had a lot of working sessions and research done, and these are the question types and sections and content that's really valuable to today's real-world business school curriculum. All 3 GMAT section scores contribute equally to the total score. So I know there's a lot of questions around, which is weighted heavier than another section, is one weighted heavier than the other. No, they're all weighted evenly and equally for the total score.
Thank you so much for clarifying that, Anjali. So for the audience, this is like one version of the exam, and Anjali, thank you for actually clarifying the structure of the exam for our candidates. I'd like to kind of like build on that. A lot of people are either contemplating getting the GMAT exam or are already on their path of preparing for the exam. Ashok, given your deep understanding of the exam and its preparation, I'd like to shift the focus to a very important question that many candidates have when they start their GMAT prep. What material should I use for preparing? So, in your experience, like, why is the official resource so critical for their preparation journey?
That's a great question. I'll give us, I have a certain story about, why I think our items or our practice material is the best that's available out there. One simple reason is because the practice questions that are included either within the practice exams or practice questions or the official guide that we make available have previously been on the exam, and therefore what you're practicing with is effectively real content that has been retired from the official exam, if you will, that is now available for prep. So you are practicing with close to what is going to be the real types of questions that you will see on your exam. But just in terms of how should candidates think about this journey, I would start with the GMAT official starter kit, and it's available for free, right? All you need to do is create an account on MBA.com, you get a login and you get access to it. And through the GMAT official starter kit, you get 2 practice exams along with 70 or more practice questions, as well as a guided review, for some key concepts, especially quantitative concepts, right? The reason I say, start with that is primarily because it's free. I mean, there are other materials out there. We also offer the GMAT official guide. I know that there are other third parties available out there that produce their own prep material, Target Test Prep, Manhattan Prep, you can name a few if you will. But I think the GMAT official starter kit is a great place to start. I would actually start with taking one of the practice exams that's included within the starter kit, primarily as a benchmarking tool, because what you get by taking that is a great score report that is the same as what you get on the official GMAT exam. And it gives you detailed feedback about your performance, right? How have you performed by section? If there are certain schools, how would you benchmark that score against certain schools that you're interested in applying to? It's helpful in identifying certain item types or content domains or fundamental skills that you might need help with, right? And understanding how to sort of manage your time and how effective you are at leveraging the review and edit function that was now being introduced on the GMAT Focus exam. And so that gives you a picture of, which sections, item types, and content domains you might need to focus on as a result. And then once you're armed with that feedback, you can then begin your preparation journey. We have the GMAT official guide, and you can focus your preparation journey on those question types or sections, if you will, where you need additional help with, right? Or where you need to focus your preparation on, if you will. And that has a lot of answer explanations that are provided so that you can understand why a particular solution is the right solution, if you will. And it helps you understand how to solve questions. And you can, it's organized by different sections as well. And you also get access from the GMAT official guide to an online question bank that includes a broader set of questions from previous years. And that allows you to create custom question sets and monitor your timing, if you will, so that you understand how to sort of maximize your performance. And through that process, right, once you sort of practiced with some content through the official guide, then you can start taking more practice exams, really to assess where you're at, if you will, along this preparation journey. And in addition to the 2 free practice exams, obviously we make additional practice exams available for a fee, as well as additional practice questions available for a fee that candidates can use along their preparation journey to feel confident that at the end of the day, they've put their best foot forward when trying to prepare for this exam.
That's extensive advice, Ashok. And one key takeaway, there's a lot of prep materials, guys, that is provided by, the exam body. And Ashok, I'm like really grateful that you mentioned the official starter kit. I'm a personal fan. There's just like so much of information for people to actually take from there. And to the audience, I see your questions in the chat. These questions will be taken, so do continue to keep adding your questions. Meanwhile, we've been seeing from an insider perspective. Zach, you are both an insider as well as a test taker, right? You've experienced the GMAT exam firsthand, and I'd like to carry forward the discussion on prep. As a test taker, did you find that the GMAT official practice exams prepared you well for the actual exam? And as a test taker, how closely did the question and the experience actually, appear in terms of your content and difficulty when you appeared for the exam? And what's your advice for candidates in general?
Sure, great question. So I'll answer the second question first. So I've taken the GMAT online and at a test center, both within the last 6 months. I took test center 2 months ago, and I think like 3.5 months ago online. I did not take the exam in the same section order each time, but the actual test taking experience was the same. I mean, I got the 3 sections. Each section was 45 minutes, the same number of questions in each section that you're supposed to get. So from that perspective, the exam is completely the same. The difference, of course, is where you're taking it. When I first took it online, my computer is woefully old, so I had to build in a lot of time ahead of when I was taking the test to make sure that I had like all the security features downloaded and that my computer was up to speed, which somehow it was actually. And I also had to make sure that at home I had a secure area to take it in. And that was a little bit difficult because my partner works at home, so I had to schedule with her like when I would take the exam, when she would be out of the house. So while the exam experience was the same, I actually found it a little bit easier for me personally in my life to take it at a test center, which I'm really lucky that a test center was right down the street from where I live, so I didn't have to coordinate with anyone at home or have to reserve the Wi-Fi, even though it's better to use, of course, a wired internet connection if you're testing online. So yeah, and then I'll talk to the prep. So I took the exam both times, not to get into business school, but for work purposes. So I did really light prep. Certainly not the amount of prep that one I would advise anybody to go through if they're taking it for business school admissions. And I did take advantage of our free resources. And just to like what Ashok said, the questions are very similar to what you'll experience on the test. The different question types are written in similar ways. Of course, that applies like a lot to something like a data sufficiency question where the answer choices are the same no matter what the question is asking. And the different concepts that you get in like the problem solving questions and quantitative reasoning. There's no surprise content domains or topics that are different between the practice exams and the real tests, unless of course you're taking old practice exams, which maybe have sentence correction questions or anything like that. But yeah, I actually found that the prep was very well suited to my experience. I mean, what's different in my experience about the prep is that I could pick and choose like the level of difficulty questions that I wanted to practice with. And of course, I started with easier ones to get me more warmed up. And when you're actually taking the exam, the questions that you receive are not all easy, especially for someone who did not prep as much as I did. So yeah, that's sort of I love the free stuff. It feels very true to life. It's comforting and surprising to take the test and see familiar faces in the questions.
Thank you, Zach. I mean, that's interesting. I feel it's kind of helpful for the candidates to know that, what you've experienced kind of like in the practice actually aligns closely as well. That kind of clarity can really boost confidence for candidates when they're actually going into the exam day, right? And meanwhile, I see all of your audience questions. Guys, please continue adding your questions into the chat. For those of you who have joined in quite recently, you are live with Ashok Sarathy, Anjali, McKenzie, and Zachary Fernebok from Graduate Management Admission Council. And I'm Seema Parikyar, your host for this session. So this is a Q&A session, so do drop in your questions into the live chat. I'd now like to circle back to the exam again. From an insider perspective, Anjali, you mentioned that the new GMAT exam is shorter, and naturally, the first question on many people's minds is what's the catch? Does a shorter exam make it harder or easier to score well, especially when it comes to personal?
Yes, this is a question we often get, so thank you for asking it. So since the GMAT exam is a computer adaptive exam, which is something I didn't mention earlier, but it is a computer adaptive exam, that means that it adapts to each candidate's individual ability. So the questions that you're served up really adapt to your ability and how you've done on the previous question, how you've done on the exam. So the length itself doesn't make it inherently harder or more difficult to achieve a higher percentile. It really has, the length of the exam doesn't impact the difficulty. I think a lot of that is subjective, right? How much have you prepared? Are you comfortable with the content? So the perception of difficulty or harder to achieve a higher percentile is dependent on a lot of factors related to your prep, to your comfort with the material, to your expertise in the areas of quant, data insights, verbal reasoning. So a lot of it comes down to that. And actually, with the shorter exam, it's a little bit of the opposite when it comes to sort of difficulty and shortened length. So the shortened length actually helps you perform better on the exam because, like I said, we removed certain question types like sentence correction, pure geometry. So candidates no longer have to study those different question types, right? It's actually the amount of content you have to study for the GMAT exam is actually much lower than it used to be. So that should inherently actually make it easier. Another element about the exam that I hadn't mentioned earlier, which some of you may be familiar with, is the ability to review and edit questions, right? So in terms of preparing your, your studying approach or preparing your strategy for taking the exam, that's a really important factor to consider because now candidates have the ability to review up to as many questions as they like and change answers for up to 3 questions. So that gives you a little bit of flexibility. You don't have to spend too much time on an individual question. You can sort of table it, move on to the next question, come back to that later. So overall, in terms of, is it more difficult? Again, a lot of that's subjective to your own strengths and weaknesses. We've added features, we've reduced the number of question types, we've added features like question review and edit that actually reduce anxiety and make it easier. So overall, the amount of preparation time and your ability to perform well has improved.
So basically, there's no catch, guys. The exam has actually become more candidate friendly. So you should not be scared of actually taking the exam. There's a lot of new features that's truly beneficial for your exam experience. So go ahead and book your exam. That's the first thing that I would actually like to say. So thank you, Anjali, for helping our candidates understand this particular factor. And now that we've discussed a bit about the exam, I'd like to actually shift to a really, really critical aspect, test security. Ashok, maintaining test integrity is like a really top priority for us. And just to share with the candidates as well, what steps does GMAC take to ensure that the exam remains fair and unbiased across different regions and demographics? Additionally, what are the consequences for candidates suspected of engaging in suspicious behavior?
Thanks, Seema. So that's a multi-pronged set of questions right there. But so let me just talk initially about the first question, right? About what we do to ensure that the test is really unbiased and a fair evaluation of candidates' ability level, right? Just from the development of questions themselves, right? So at a very high level, every question type, so think data sufficiency, think problem solving, think graphics interpretation on each of the different sections of the exam. Each of them has what I call a specification. That's a template in terms of how the item should be written. And, there's also an item writing guide, if you will, for each item type, right? And we recruit subject matter experts to write question formats. They're trained on these item writing guidelines, if you will. They have to give examples to sort of demonstrate their capability. If their examples don't match the quality that we expect, those are rejected, if you will, in that regard. And so we go through a rather intensive process to train subject matter experts to write items of the right specification, if you will. And then once they start writing items or questions, if you will, then it goes through a very extensive review process. We review it, multiple stages of review, right? We review it for editorial reviews. We review it for soundness to make sure that it's actually measuring the right skill that the item is intended to measure. And then ultimately, we also review it for fairness and bias, right? So one of the things that we do is that we make sure we do have an international panel of reviewers from each of the major regions of the world, and also representing different religious, ethnic, and demographic backgrounds of our test takers to review those questions to make sure that those questions don't bias against any particular group of test taker, if you will, unfairly, right? And then additionally, then we go through each item before it becomes live, actually goes through a whole statistical analysis process because it's included on the exam initially as a research question. And then we get all the data and we do statistical analysis to make sure that it doesn't bias against any particular group of test takers before we say it can be introduced as an operational question or a question that will ultimately count towards somebody's score, if you will, right? So there's a whole process just in the writing and the review of questions to make sure that the questions themselves are fair and unbiased. Counting from, an overall test security perspective, though, we have a number of policies, procedures that we, follow through a prevention, detection, and enforcement standpoint, if you will, to make sure that the test is fair, right? A lot of our prevention comes from the policies around. We have certain policies related to retake policies, what you're allowed to bring into the testing room, right? You're not allowed to bring all of your reference materials. You're not allowed to bring a cell phone, for example, into the testing room, right? All of those are policies, and candidates have to agree to those policies, if you will, right? Additionally, people are aware that we, have secure browsers for the online version of the exam that ultimately prevent candidates from accessing other applications, if you will, on their computer. So that locks down the browser. Obviously, the proctors themselves, the human proctors, either at the test center or online, are monitoring candidates, if you will, on an ongoing basis. They're obviously trained so that they know what to look for, if you will, and can take appropriate action as and when they detect something. All sessions are recorded, audio, video recorded, right? So if we find candidates engaging in some type of fraudulent behavior, then those are going to be reviewed multiple times, and ultimately decisions will be taken, if you will, in that regard. And then from an enforcement standpoint, additionally, we take action, right? We're not afraid to take action either in the moment when we detect it. Sometimes we may not detect it in the moment, and we might detect it at a later point in time, right? And so we always take the standpoint that if we find information that is very credible, that calls into question the integrity of a score, even if we released it to a school based on the candidate's choice, but we doubt the integrity of that score, then we will cancel it. And we'll take different types of actions, if you will, against those that are perpetrating, fraud. It might involve, you're limited or prevented from taking the test for a certain period of time, for 6 months to a year, sometimes more, depending on how egregious the infraction is. Or sometimes it might say you can't take it on a particular channel, if you will, but you can take it in a test center channel, right, in this particular regard. So the types of actions that are available at our disposal vary, but it is all guided by the notion that we want to make it fair and equitable for all test takers to perform to the best of their ability and ultimately get an equal chance for consideration in front of an admissions committee for the school that they're considering applying to.
Thank you for sharing such a detailed insight into this whole process, both from the test integrity perspective as well as the security, Ashok. And it's really reassuring to know that such strong measures are actually in place to protect both the integrity as well as the security, because I think that's really important for candidates on this journey who do spend a lot of time and effort preparing for the exam and going through the process. And for the audience who's joined us in, take the exam authentically. We've made sure that it's best aligned to you. I'm going to shift the gears a bit slightly, and Zach, again, coming back to you. This is from a bit of a test taker perspective again. A lot of times people who are going through the exam, even when they think about taking the exam, we have people who are retaking the exam as well. So time pressure and mental fatigue are some of the real challenges that people face during the GMAT. A little less now with the new changes that have actually come in. How did you balance accuracy versus the speed while working through the questions? And how did you stay focused, especially while facing the questions that were tough for you? And what's the advice that you have for people who are planning to take the exam as well?
Sure, that's a great question, and I did have a little change of scenery here, so I appreciate your patience while I move to a different room. I think the acoustics in this one are much better. So the thing that, like, the number one piece of advice that I would give for anybody taking the test and is worried about the timing, and something that I learned the hard way taking the test, is if you don't know how to solve a question, skip it and go back to it at the end. And by skip it, I mean just like select any answer and just like make a mental note in your notepad that, hey, this question is one I want to return to. Because what I saw in my results when I was looking at my score reports is that there were some questions. In one case, I spent almost 9 minutes, really almost 9 minutes on one question because I thought I could solve it. And then, so I was doing like all the math, doing a bunch of stuff by hand. And then when I got my score report and I saw that I got this one wrong, I wasted so much time on a question that I ultimately got wrong. And those 9 minutes I could have spent much better on questions later in the section. But I really dug my heels in and was like almost playing a mind game with myself. And that's sort of like how I would suggest that anybody who's prepping for the GMAT, to my number one piece of advice is don't get in your own way, right? If you've been doing consistent prep, you know the different topic areas, you have your strengths, you are familiar with your weaknesses. Don't get stubborn, don't get stuck. To get one question wrong is okay. It's okay to get questions wrong on a test. It's expected. But you don't want to have that one wrong question be the reason why you get other questions wrong later because you run out of time. So I really have no other advice than that. It really, like, as everybody said on the panel, like, there's strengths and weaknesses that everybody has. Test difficulty is subjective. But what is not subjective is as humans, our ability to get in our own way. So when it comes to timing, just don't get too stuck on one question.
Yeah, I think that's useful advice, because we sometimes tend to take it so personally. Like, if I spend so much of time on this particular question, I might as well spend a lot more time on that question and then get it right. But that's where I think smart test taking strategies actually come into place. So, Zach, thank you for sharing that insight. For our audience, I can see more than 1,000 people on, and I just want to tell you guys, I see your questions, and we're going to take questions in between. So, guys, I just want to pick one question for now from the audience. Mayur is the first one who asked this question. Um, how do schools view multiple GMAT scores if they choose to retake the exam? I think this basically means, like, if I've taken the exam once, I've sent the scores, and I'm resending the scores again after they retaking the exam. Are the schools going to look at it differently? I'm going to leave it open to anybody to actually take this up. So,
Sure, I can address this question. This is a really good question. Because it's actually an improvement from the previous version of the exam. So again, for those that might be familiar previously, we had a different system where you accepted and canceled your score, and we shared historical scores, but I don't want to talk about that too much because I want to talk about the current state, which is a much improved user experience. So today, if you take multiple tests, if you retake the test multiple times, you are in control of where you send your score. So if you take your test the first time and you send your score to a program, they will only see that score. If you take the test the second time and you don't want to send that score, nobody will see that score except for you. If you take a test the third time and you send it to a different program, not the same program that you sent your first score to, that program will only see your third attempt score. They will not see the first score. They will not see the second score. They won't see any of your historical scores. They will only see the score that you elect to send to the program. So you really are in control of where your score is sent to. And just as a reminder, you have, after completing your exam and getting your official score, you have 48 hours to send up to 5 free score reports completely free. So that's for free within 48 hours of receiving your official score. After that, there is a fee to send your score. But what we found from our data is the majority of candidates, do leverage at least some of those free score reports. So that takes, that's a very good feature for candidates. It takes a lot of pressure off in terms of having to pay that immediate, fee. You have those 5 free score reports that you're able to send. So if you know where you want to apply, even if you're not sure if you're going to apply to that program, we highly encourage candidates to take advantage of those 5 free score reports, right? There's no harm in leveraging those 5 free score reports, sending them to programs. Even if you decide, a couple months from now, you're like, nah, don't feel like applying to that program, or I don't think that's the right fit for me. Even though they still have your score, it doesn't really matter. You were able to take advantage of those 5 free score reports. But you're completely in control of your score. You get to see your official score before you actually make a decision on whether to send it or not, which is also a great benefit to candidates. So you will have full information, full control of your score sending.
thank you for answering that question, Anjali. Yes, Zach.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to jump in there, and I want to advocate for 2 things. So one, if you take the GMAT more than once and your first attempt isn't as isn't exactly what you were aiming for, and you took it again, and it was more in line with the score that you were hoping to get, I would suggest sending both scores to schools for schools and admissions committees to see like, hey, not only am I serious about getting into business school, so because I took the GMAT exam, but I'm serious about getting a good score and improving. So I want you to see that I studied and I got a score that was better than the first time I took it. Because that shows like, hey, this person actually can study and do well, and that's school, right? And the second thing is that even if you take the exam once or twice and you're not so happy with your score, to still send it to programs, because something that's really cool about the score report is that if you send your score to certain programs, you can see how your score compares to scores that were sent to the same program within the last 5 years of data. So it's a really great tool for learning about your competitiveness too, if you send your score, even if it's not one that you are particularly proud of or confident in. So sometimes sending your score to programs can be beneficial, not just for applications, but for planning how you want to tackle the next phase of your business school admissions journey.
That's quite interesting take as well. This next question, I would love to hear all of your perspective because Srishti has actually asked a very interesting question, which is like, what are the most common misconceptions that you guys have come across about the GMAT exam from prospective test takers? Ashok, would you like to go first on this one?
Sure. I think one of the most common ones that I've come across in my career is where candidates have been taught that because the GMAT exam is adaptive, you should focus primarily on the first few questions on a particular section, because that ultimately is what drives your score. And what tends to happen sometimes, unfortunately, is that if people rely on that misconception or that very poor advice, is that sometimes candidates spend an inordinate amount of time on the first few questions of the exam, and then ultimately either rushed or don't complete the section, if you will, right? So don't complete all of the questions on a section. And I think that will, and that will result in a penalty, right? So here's the key thing for people to focus on. It's important to sort of make sure that you're balancing your time with responding to a question. Each question on the test is going to count towards your exam. So it's not just, the first few questions that you see on the test that are going to count. Every single question on the test. And if you end up not being able to complete your section or an exam because you spent an inordinate amount of time on the first few sections, there will be a penalty and you will lose out because you haven't completed that particular section based on the number of questions that you haven't completed. So I would definitely advocate to candidates, please balance your time. All of the questions on the test have been researched, and by research, to make sure that they also work from a timing perspective, right? On average, somewhere, between 2 minutes and 2 minutes and a few seconds is the amount of time that candidates should be spending on each question. That's not to sort of say that every single question should only take 2 minutes, but that's approximately how candidates should think about balancing their time, if you will. So that's one of the misconceptions about only focusing on the initial questions on the exam that, I would definitely like to bust that myth, if you will. And that's, that's really poor advice.
What about you, Anjali?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of myths as it relates to the GMAT and scoring. So, I can talk in length about this, but my score will be negatively impacted if I take longer to answer a question. So the actual amount of time you take to answer a question does not impact your score, either your section score or total score. My score will be worse if I get the first or second question wrong in a specific section. So again, like the position of the question, whether it's the earlier questions, the later questions, it's an adaptive algorithm, but there's a lot that goes into the algorithm. Just because if you get the first few questions wrong isn't gonna impact your score in the way that some perceive it to impact your score, to make it a worse score, for example. I alluded to this earlier a little bit, but if I'm running out of time, and Ashok kind of mentioned this, leaving the question, it's better to leave the question blank than to guess an answer. Or I think Zach also mentioned this actually as part of his sort of taking the test strategy, right? Like we'd rather you guess an answer than leave it blank, because there is a penalty if you leave questions unanswered. So those are just a few of the myths we've heard. I think Ashok and Zach cover these sort of in their answers as well. But yeah, there's some stuff we hear, but those are a lot of the common ones.
And what I'll add, I think this is all sort of in the same theme here, is you don't need a perfect score to get into business school. Like completely false. Don't need it. Like if you go to any of like the class profiles of the top 10, 20 schools, business schools in the world, you'll see a very, very large score range of scores admitted, not just from GMAT, but other exams. And when schools are looking to build their classes, they're looking at the whole application holistically. It's not just your score, it's also your essays, your work experience, your undergrad experience, your extracurricular activities, your interview. The score is just another thing that you can add to that application. And what makes a score unique on the GMAT or any test is that unlike maybe your undergraduate GPA, you can actually take control of what your score on a test is by the amount of time you spend studying, or how far in advance you decide to apply to business school. Like these are things within your control, and make up the full picture of your application and who you are as a person. So I would say that people don't get too hung up on being in the top 90th percentile or whatever. It's really about like you as a person and that full package you bring as a student to business school.
Thank you all for your, perspectives on, like, I think there's just so many misconceptions, and especially when it's an exam, it's just so easy to kind of have all of those misconceptions, but thank you for talking about it. There's one question, that is so important. A lot of times when I have conversations with candidates or, potential test takers or prospective test takers, they don't really know about, the support that we actually offer for candidates with special needs. So Anjali, I just wanted to deep dive into this a bit. Like, could you elaborate on how GMAC actually supports candidates with disabilities, particularly regarding exam taking tools and timing accommodations?
Yes, I'm really glad, excuse me, you asked this question, Seema, because, there are a lot of candidates out there that might be needing an accommodation, might require some of the tools or options we have for accommodations. So I'll give a little bit of background on the accommodations and what we offer. But, we have a whole bunch of additional information on mba.com that certainly I think we can link to or pass out or share the link after the session. But so we have a really robust set of accommodations that we offer at GMAC for the GMAT exam. And it's across the channels. So both the test delivery channel as well as the online channel. So some examples of these accommodations include additional testing time, which is a common one, extended break time, Zoom text. So, if you need to Zoom the text in, screen readers, if you need support with that, the ability to bring medical devices if needed. So anything that you have, in terms of an accommodation related to medical devices, we have that option. And each of these can really help candidates with disabilities manage the overall testing experience for them and make it the best experience for them. So what I was alluding to earlier is that we actually have an entire guide on, what we offer, how to apply for an accommodation, what documentation you need to provide. It's a really great guide for candidates that need to go down this path. So everything you need to know is in there. And we can, like I said, absolutely share that link after this session. And one other thing I do want to call out as it relates to accommodations, because sometimes I think this point gets confused a little bit, is that it's important that you, request your accommodation and make sure you get a response, get the approval, get the accommodation added to your profile before you schedule your appointment, right? Because if you schedule an appointment before you request the accommodation or before the accommodation gets approved, that means you're scheduling a non-accommodated appointment. If you schedule your appointment and then get the accommodation approved later, like, it won't be automatically added because you've already scheduled your appointment before that was approved. So you would probably have to go in and cancel your appointment and then schedule a new appointment after you got the accommodation approval. So it's just best practice to go ahead and submit your application for the accommodation as early as possible, get the approval, or get the result of that application, and then go ahead and schedule your appointment. And that'll just help, avoid any of those issues with making sure you have an accommodated appointment versus a non-accommodated appointment. And the last thing I'll call out around accommodations is, your documentation, your information. We have a dedicated manager reviewing every single person's application. Like, it doesn't go through any sort of AI tool. There's not a robot back there. Like, we have a single person managing everything related to accommodations. And I think that's really important, right? Like, you have a human being working in the office, reading through everything, is there to support you, communicate with you if you have any questions. That guide that I mentioned has an email on it that goes directly to this person's inbox. So again, we're really dedicated, and it's very, very important to support candidates that require accommodations. So it's a high priority for us.
I'm really glad that we could actually talk about this, because I think especially from South Asia region, I mean, I can safely say that, like, a lot of people don't really know about this. And Zach, I know that you're kind of like waiting to speak about this. Please go ahead, both Ashok and Zach. Like, Zach, go first.
Yeah, I mean, obviously everything that Anjali said is correct. But what I want to add also is that if you take an accommodated appointment, that won't show up on your score report if you send it to schools. That's completely private. As somebody who has a learning disability, I know that sometimes there can be some weird feelings about, like, divulging that you have a certain condition or whatever, but it's not something that's identified on your score report after you take an accommodated appointment. So it's totally private and has no bearing on how schools perceive you.
Yes, Ashok.
No, nothing much to add on that particular topic. I think both Anjali and Zach have, have certainly covered, the value of applying for an accommodation if you feel you need it, right? If there's a demonstrated need, if you will, for an accommodation, then definitely apply for one, because it's our goal as part of ensuring that we deliver a fair test for all candidates, if you will, that even candidates who might be differently abled are able to access the test in the best way, shape, or form, right? So please definitely apply for an accommodation under the assumption that you have a demonstrated need, if you will, for it. There will be an in-depth review conducted to make sure that we're, evaluating it fully, and then sort of, awarding the appropriate accommodation necessary to do your best on the exam.
Right. Thank you, everybody. And as I've mentioned, I think it's great that we are actually able to talk about this. And of course, this video is going to be available to everybody for later as well. So there's a lot of takeaways from this session that we are having right now, actually. The next question that I would like to actually, address is to you, Ashok, before we start taking more questions from the audience. So when we actually launched a new format of the exam, one of the things that we began to offer is the enhanced score report for no additional cost, right? So during the prep for the practice exams, also we have such a detailed report on the performance, and even for the actual exam, there's such deep insights into the test taking. How would you recommend that the candidates actually use this to refine their strategy if they are going to retake the exam?
Sure. And I talked about this, when talking about prep as well. But like I mentioned, the official score report has very rich information about your performance. It gives you a sense of your performance by not just your total score, but how you performed on the individual sections. For the schools that you might be interested in applying, where do you fall amongst all of the candidates who are interested in applying to that particular school or program, if you will. It also looks at your performance by the different types of items or the item types. So say data sufficiency or problem solving or reading comprehension or critical reasoning and so on and so forth. Also by certain content domains and the fundamental skills as well, right? So you can clearly then see where you have areas that you might need additional improvement upon if you want to sort of boost your score, if you will. The score report also gives you a sense of how you performed time-wise on the exam, right? What amount of time have you spent on each of the questions, if you will, for each section? And again, it also gives you a sense of how effective you were at leveraging the review and edit functionality in that particular context. So I would definitely give it a deep look, if you will, based on, where you think your areas of improvement are after you've taken your first exam and reviewing that official score report. That's now part of the exam fee, if you will. You don't have to pay extra for it. That's the most interesting aspect of it, which is that we've made it available as part of your exam fee itself. And so leverage it, use it to focus your any additional prep that you want to do, that you need to do, if you will, with our practice materials. And then ultimately, go forwards with that confidence that, okay, I know that I've worked on my areas of improvement, and sort of allowing you to put your best foot forwards, if you will. It really helps you focus your prep, the detailed insight that you get from the really comprehensive score report, official score report, as well as the prep score report that we make available to candidates.
I really like the term that you use, rich content that's actually provided, because I've gone through the report. It's really rich content that they can actually use. So for our audience who's logged in and viewing this, our official prep materials, your official starter kit, which is for free, your practice exams, all of it has got detailed insights. In addition to that, if you've taken the exam, to take the time out to go through the report in detail and use that as a benchmark to kind of like focus on the key areas of improvement and work onwards from there. Great insights from Ashok. I have a question. So guys, just letting you guys know that we are taking questions. So keep adding your questions into the chat. I do see your questions there. We have one question from Parma Shivam. So when can we expect the latest percentile update? So I think this is more about, when do we actually update the percentiles in general? So just, putting, Anjali, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so we are on a regular annual schedule for updating the percentile tables. So it's usually in Q3, so July, August, or September of each year. So I don't have, a specific date that I can answer right now, but it will be updated in Q3 of this year and every year. And one more thing to call out with percentiles, I just want to mention is that, we do update percentiles every single year, right? So there's going to be small shifts. It's dependent on the population that takes the GMAT exam. So I don't want anyone to be, surprised or put too much weight on, this percentile went from 89th percentile to 90th percentile or 60th percentile to 61st percentile, right? Like those shifts are very much expected. There hasn't been a shift that we've been surprised about over the last several years. So again, just take that, with that, keep that in mind as you're reviewing percentiles. And if something shifted a little bit based on your score, that's absolutely expected because it's very much dependent on the population taking the GMAT exam.
Thank you so much for actually sharing that, Anjali. I want to actually bring back to some of the general questions that people usually have, which is when candidates actually go to the test center, and we've gotten questions, and I'm sure all of us have at some point gotten a call from somebody when they got to the test center and they faced issues because they didn't have certain things in place. So some of the things that, like a checklist that a candidate, a test taker must keep in mind and, stick to when they are going for an exam at the test center. So open to any of you. Yeah.
I'll start. One thing is just, obviously, when you're going for your test, I think the first, you want to make sure that you're aware, always review the email confirmation that tells you where your test center is located so that you budget enough time to sort of reach the test center on time. You always want to reach, 30 minutes to 15 minutes before your exam appointment, if you will. So sort of budget amount, a certain amount of time to reach by whatever means of transportation you need to sort of take to reach the test center. So I think that is very important. The other thing to sort of also prepare when you, before you even think about going to the test center, is take the right form of identification, if you will. We have our ID policies by country that is listed on MBA.com. So review the ID or the identification policies to understand what is the right form of ID that you must present and bring. It has to sort of bear your name as you've entered it when registering for the GMAT exam, if you will. So it should match exactly. The photograph should be a right likeness. The date of birth should match. And it should be valid, right? It should be current. It can't be expired, if you will, in that regard. So make sure that you're taking the right form of ID based on where you're located, if you will. And the other thing that, sometimes these are common mistakes, right? When you arrive at the test center, you'll be provided a test taker rules and agreement that the test center administrator will ask you to read. Take the time to read it, understand, those are additional details about policies that you need to adhere to, if you will. So read that. Because once you read that, you'll be asked to provide your digital signature agreeing to it, if you will. So make sure you've read it and understood it, and then provide your digital signature. And then my last piece of advice is, when you're in the test center, make sure that you keep all of your pockets pretty much empty. If you have personal items, make sure they are locked in a locker, if you will. Typically, they'll provide you a locker or for you to sort of keep your personal items in, especially things like cell phones. Please do not, keep that in anywhere close by, if you will, to you. When you're at the test center, don't reference it until you've finished your exam and literally have left the testing center, if you will, would be my recommendation. But even otherwise, if you, for whatever reason, you bring any prep materials, don't bring those, keep them locked in your locker, if you will. I would even suggest don't bring them to the test center. But if you do bring them, keep them locked always. We don't want candidates referencing them in that particular regard. So hopefully that's a little bit of a laundry list, but hopefully that's, some insight in terms of, what to sort of just make sure you're prepared with when you arrive at the test center, if you will.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so Ashok covered a lot of the main ones. We actually have a great checklist on MBA.com. So there's a checklist on the site itself and then a PDF that you can download that I think has covered most of the things, and a few more tips for your actual test taking experience. So, don't read questions out loud, pay attention to the screen and focus on the screen, not your surroundings. So the checklist actually we have, applies for online or test center. So we have a checklist for both of those delivery channels. And the last thing I'll say, just to add on to what Ashok mentioned, was when it comes to the travel, and making sure you know how to get there, the directions, we found that some candidates even, test out the route the day before or the week before to make sure they have enough time, right? Especially in areas where there might be a lot of traffic, or you have a long commute, or you're taking a train, for example, or something like that. Even kind of doing a trial run before exam day could really help reduce anxiety on exam day. So that's one recommendation we have, and some candidates like to take advantage of it. And then the last thing I will say about this is also just, relax. Don't try to like cram the morning of your assessment. We really find it's important to give your brain a little bit of break, give yourself a little bit of breather, get a really good night of rest, good night's sleep, and just be refreshed the morning that you're taking your exam, the day of your exam. So no need to cram in that last final 5-10 questions. I think it's better to just kind of give yourself a little bit of break and go into there with a refreshed mindset.
That's a lot of advice. And yeah, I mean, no last minute prep then. I mean, I do definitely get this question that is, what should I do in the last few minutes? How much can I actually learn more? And it's like, yeah, relax, guys. You've got this. So thank you so much for sharing that. We are at actually time, but I just want to make sure that maybe we can just like take two more questions. We've kind of answered most of the questions that's come in. But Zach, I have a question for you from again. A lot of times people actually prepare for the exam and they get stuck at a certain score, right? In prep organizations, I'm sure they call it a plateau. So what advice, and I would probably say kind of like a final advice in general for all of the test takers, even if they are preparing for a long time and they, even with consistent prep, and they feel like they're stuck at a certain score, what advice would you give them to kind of like break out of that plateau?
Sure. Nobody knows more about plateauing than I do. I've been on a plateau my whole life. So I think if you have been studying consistently and you are sort of reaching like this point of like you're not getting any more gains or the ROI isn't there, I would suggest one of two things. So one would be just to like take a break, stop studying, come back to it after a couple days. Like hopefully you have that amount of time built into your study schedule that you can just like take a break from all the prep, because our brains are very powerful, but they can get overloaded really fast. So if you have been consistently studying and you're not seeing any improvement, take a break. Honestly, that can be just like the make or break difference. And the second thing is if you're studying, switch up how you're studying. We all learn very differently. Some people like to study by themselves. Some people like study groups. Some people like lectures. Some people like to have hands-on experience. So if you feel like you are doing like a lot of like solo studying, doing practice exams or practice questions, try changing it up. Try to go online, find somebody else who's studying, have a conversation with them. Maybe find some videos online that you can just like sit back and listen to and take notes, like old school college lecture hall type of processing of information. So one piece of advice would be take a break. Another piece of advice would be just completely switch up what you're doing. And yeah, you might learn a lot about like how you are as a studier or as a student, which would be really good to know before you go to business school.
Excellent piece of advice, Zach. Love that. As I said, we are at time, and I just want to thank everybody. More than 1,000 people still tuned in, and I just want to actually thank everybody who's stayed on. We're probably going to end with this question from Ananya, and I want to actually address it to you, Ashok. What do you think really differentiates GMAT from other exams, especially in terms of assessing the real world business skills and experiences?
That's a great question, Ananya. What I would say, at the very least, when we've designed the exam in terms of identifying the types of questions that are measured on the exam, it's gone through an in-depth research process, if you will, before coming onto the exam. And that is involved, it starts with identifying the skills that are important for candidates to have in the business world, and then consequently as a prerequisite into business school, right? A lot of it has come from research in terms of the skills needed based on review of a lot of research journals, business-related research journals, popular business journals, understanding the business world, if you will, so that we are identifying the types of skills that candidates need to execute on in a business setting, and then ultimately in business school. It then additionally goes through a lot of research with faculty members at business schools to identify which of these skills are important for candidates to have before entering a business program, and which skills are going to be imparted by the faculty themselves in programs. And once we've got that list of skills that are important for candidates to have prior to entering a business program, then we go through the research process of identifying the types of questions that measure those skills. And then we research those skills, test them out with candidates, if you will. And then we put it on the test. And we also do a significant amount of validity studies to make sure that the skills measured on the exam are relevant to business schools. So it's a very valid experience, if you will, in that particular regard. The other piece that I will say in general, just about the GMAT exam, is that it does differentiate effectively across the spectrum, right? So one of the things that it does allow you as a candidate to do is genuinely stand out based on where you are on the ability spectrum, right? And that is critical. You can take comfort that schools will then be able to sort of understand your capabilities well and truly, no matter where you are on that spectrum, because it does follow a standard normal bell curve, unlike some exams where some candidates may be just bunched up right at the end, and then schools aren't able to differentiate effectively about, okay, who truly has an ability or who doesn't have an ability, right? So that's one of the key elements that we factor into this process. The other thing that I would also sort of recommend to candidates as they're going through this journey is that, if you want to put yourself in front of schools, as you're creating your profile, we ask you to opt in if you want to be contacted by schools, right? So we call it grad select, if you will. And if you want to sort of be contacted by schools, I would advocate you enter your profile to as much extent possible, so that because schools are able to search for candidates based on demographics, based on educational background, based on work experience, based on your future interests, right? I want to get a career in consulting, or your future industry-based experiences, right? A lot of that demographic background is really rich and helps you get searched on, if you will, by schools. So opt in, and it's it's no expense to you to just opt in, if you will. All you need to do is just click that little box, and you're in the pool to be searched on by schools. So as you are searching for schools, understand that schools are also searching for candidates like you, right? In this particular regard, it is two-way matching, if you will. And so that really helps candidates, if you will.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that over 90% of our top 100 programs are using the Grad Select Search service. So it's a really good way to access those, not only those top programs, but a ton of programs in the system. And if you do enroll in Grad Select, which as Ashok mentioned is completely free, you'll also get sort of direct scholarship information from programs, direct financial aid information from programs. So there's a lot a lot of valuable information that you can gain through Grad Select. And it's really simple to just fill out some of that profile information, and you can get access and get exposure to a ton of schools and programs. So it's an awesome tool.
You've just answered one of the questions as well. Pooja says, thanks to you guys for addressing Grad Select. But I would, on that note, conclude this session. And what an incredible session this has been. We've managed to cover a lot of things. So I just want to thank, you, Anjali, Ashok, and Zach for making it here and actually sharing such valuable insights today for our audience. Thank you so much. And to our audience, because they've been so engaging and, throwing in a lot of questions our way. But before we wrap up, I'd like to just remind everybody that you can actually find more information about the GMAT, including the preparation resources and the registration details on mba.com. So go there. If you've not created your account on mba.com, do create your free account. Go through the official starter kit. We've covered a lot of things about prep. Do watch the video from the beginning if you joined midway, because this session will be available to watch later on this channel. So feel free to revisit. And once again, thank you all for joining us today, and best of luck on the GMAT journey. So you got this.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.